Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, Life, Law, Bin. And we'll briefly speak about the interview stage. I know that this is quite early, and the truth is, I still think people should start thinking about the interview stage. Positivity goes a long way. So we'll pick your
Mhm.
brain while you're here. How did you prepare for interviews, both first and second rounds?
Yeah, I think interviews are um, the stage where you can really shine. Applications, of course, a lot of the questions you get asked are very similar from chambers to chambers. Some of them are just slightly different, and it's a bit frustrating where you have to sort of add a little bit more detail here and there. But in interview, it's really where you get the chance to shine. So the first thing I would recommend is that I've already talked about the administration, but it matters when you're preparing for interviews to set up, is what I did, a separate document for each interview that you're offered. I first of all copied and pasted my application form into that document so I could read it again, I could review it, I knew exactly what I'd written. I'd thought about, okay, what's likely to be questioned here? Are there things that need a bit more exploration, or motivations that could be better explained? So read that application form again very, very closely when you're preparing for an interview. And then another thing that helps in that document that you can have as a separate file is do some more independent research into that chambers. You won't have had much chance to do a huge amount of research when you've applied for 20 odd chambers first time round. But if you get to an interview with one of them, then you have that time, and you can go on their website, you can go on their social media pages, you can look up what's been going on recently, and helpfully quite often they will tell you who are on the interview panel. And I really recommend that you look up the barristers that are going to be interviewing you. Quite often they will have done some really interesting work. They may give an insight on their pages as to the sort of things they've been doing very recently, and that might just help you think about, okay, why am I interested in this chambers, and using that as a platform to explain that interest when you're at interview. And then that's specific preparation for chambers. Generally, I think you really have to nail the motivational questions. We mentioned earlier that the key question, why this chambers? Wow, it's an important one. It's an important one because you may not have answered it on an application form. So it might be you actually thinking about it for the first time. And it really is make or break. Of course, if you can't articulate a clear reason as to why you want to join that chamber, I don't think they're gonna entertain putting you through the second round, let alone offering you a pupillage. So you need to get that right, making sure that you can draw on your experiences as to why they are useful, and point in the direction of trying to join a chambers like the one you're getting interviewed by. And also think about the sort of general questions you could get asked, the competency-based questions, the examples of describing a time you worked in a team or with a difficult team member, overcoming a challenge, meeting a deadline, whatever those competency questions might be. And there are lots of examples of them out there. Know your answers very clearly to those sorts of questions, because it's all too easy in an interview to get flustered, and you don't quite know where you're going. But if you've thought about these things before, you will have your headline points, your keywords, your buzzwords that draw you immediately into an honest, authentic response to those questions. And then the obvious question they might ask on top of that, which I always seem to get, was a change in the law that you wanted to make. And I remember thinking, oh, this is always quite tough, this, because you kind of wanted your law question to be, your law answer to be somewhat specific to the area of chambers that you were applying to. So, a more public oriented set, you probably weren't going to talk about a change in the commercial law. That would be a little bit silly, and vice versa. So you want to have a few examples of those that you can really nail if you get asked it. And then another one alongside, change to the law might be an interesting case that you've recently heard about, or a case that you thought was wrongly decided. Again, having clear answers to those sorts of questions based on preparation will make sure that you don't come surprised. You don't think, wow, I didn't expect that. Those questions really do come up time and time again. So make sure that in your preparation, you absolutely know what you're going to say.
That's wonderful. And I was actually about to ask you for some top tips for those interview stages, but I actually suspect that you have gone into it quite extensively there. But I'm happy for you to elaborate further.
Well, I'll just to say a few more things. The first thing to say is no interview is going to be perfect. Just to reassure people, I came out of some feeling really great. I came out of some feeling awful. And you only get 10, 15 minutes sometimes. The reality is it's so restricted because they're interviewing quite a large number of people, and the people interviewing you are giving up their time to do it, often in a day or two or 2 days. So you really need to make sure that you can make as much of an impact as possible in that time. But don't stress. Don't think to yourself, oh, this is absolute make or break. It's the end of the world if I don't do well in this 10, 15 minutes, because you need to be in the right mindset. Just a top tip then maybe on that is, one thing that can help is composing yourself before you go in, be it a physical interview or an online interview. Something I would do is, it sounds silly, but taking 5 or 10 deep breaths. I would do this thing where I would move my eyes from side to side like 10 times. Sounds strange, but it just helps you like focus and sharpen your mind. And then I would consciously slow myself down. I know I can speak really quickly. This interview will be evidence of that, of how quickly I can speak. But just consciously slowing yourself down will really help you prepare yourself mentally, make sure that your answers are well articulated, and also make sure that you're memorable, because the panel are going to be interviewing 30 odd people in the first round, perhaps more, and they want to know exactly what it is that you're saying, and they want to be able to take stock of it. They are interested in all of you because they want to recruit a few of you to join them in a few years. So make sure that you're in the right mental state. And I mentioned before the quality of answers. I think probably on your channel, Near, you've had enough people talk about the STAR technique. I imagine that everyone knows about that. The situation, task, action, result technique, very, very, very useful for competency-based questions, scenario-based questions. Look that technique up. It's useful. You'll never go wrong if you keep thinking to yourself, okay, I need to make sure that I've given the situation, the task, what we did, and this was the outcome. They will then know, okay, great, that's fantastic, and they'll also know what you're doing, by the way. So many people use that technique, but it is a good one. And then I think just finally, one tip that might be worth mentioning is, a lot of people wonder, should I ask a question in an interview at the end? It's an interesting one that I've often struggled with this question myself. I remember I was told once, at a pupillage interview, any question you ask is unlikely to help you. And if anything, it could potentially cause you some issues because you might ask a very silly question. Now, that's probably true. But in my opinion, I don't know how everyone else thinks, but in my opinion, it's a little awkward at the end if you don't say anything, especially if you've still got, 5 minutes left. And you sort of, no, thank you. It doesn't hurt to think about a potential question you might want to ask. So something I would do is, if I knew the interview panel, I would look them up, and I might ask them about, their experiences, certainly during the pandemic, of adapting to hybrid advocacy, in part court-based, in part online. That's an obvious question, but you get a lot of different answers to that question, and it shows that you're interested. It shows that you want to know what practice is currently like. when I was doing most of my interviews, we were still in a somewhat lockdown, very restricted state. So that's something you could think about. And for me as well, I was applying to a lot of commercial chambers, and a couple of them, like the chambers I'm joining, Three Hare Court, offered a practicing second six where you could go to court and start to develop your own practice. And I thought that was fantastic. But I wanted to know a little bit about why they had that, because not all chambers do. And you could ask perhaps a junior member of the panel, how did that benefit you in the early stages of your career? Because I think, getting into court as early as possible, most people would argue, is really beneficial. But it's something that, not all chambers actually allow future pupils to do. So again, if you've done your independent research, you can ask those sorts of questions. Another one might be the number of seats that you'll be doing during your pupillage year. Some do the classic sort of 4, some do 6, some do even more than that. So if you've had the chance to do a bit of research, you will pick up on these sorts of potential questions. And I personally think asking one of them isn't going to cause you any issues, so long as it's honest and you're genuinely interested in the answer.
It seems clear as well, aside from all you've said, that there is a mixture of questions that you can get: scenario based, advocacy based, legally based, even current affairs based. And this is just a side note. Did you find any particularly challenging at all?
Yeah, it's a great question here. I did. I think one of the hardest is the sort of debate-based, current affairs-based questions. I've always enjoyed debating, but it can really put you on the spot. You're asked, okay, Nicholas, we'd like you to take the position where you're arguing for the abolition of wigs and gowns. And, we're going to give you 30 seconds to prepare, off you go. And you'll thought, oh, okay. And, of course you haven't planned for something like that. But there might be some even more strange or some very deeply ethical debate question you're asked. Important thing to do, though, is, which I've got here just in case, I never know if I needed them. Pen and paper always helps. By your side, ask for a few seconds just to compose your thoughts. It doesn't hurt saying, would it be okay if I just quickly jot down some notes? They don't mind. It's only going to help you structure your arguments very clearly. I often only use 2 arguments in an answer to that, because everyone uses the rule of 3. I love the rule of 3, but often you get to your second argument and you think, I forgot what my third is. So there's nothing more awkward about repeating yourself, or you're coming up with something on the spot. So often the rule of 2 can be better, certainly when you've been put on a spot. And then often what they will do, which I found really challenging, is they'll get you to completely argue the opposite. Again, it's worth thinking, okay, well, that's the sort of thing that you're going to have in court. People will ask you, judges will ask questions, you'll have to think on your feet. But just planning for that sort of scenario, practicing, with friends, with fellow applicants, with anyone, those sorts of topical, debate-oriented questions. How would I respond if I was asked that? How would I respond if I was asked to argue the opposite side immediately afterwards? That really helps. So don't let those sort of questions throw you off. They're really good opportunities to demonstrate your skills as an advocate, but make sure you've done a little bit of preparation. And then the other thing is, I got asked to do, usually at second round stage, because at first round, it's much more about your motivations for applying. You might get a couple of these sort of tricky oral advocacy based scenarios, but I think really they leave those exercises to the second round. A very common one for commercial and civil sets is making an application for summary judgment, relief from sanctions, whatever it might be. If you're at the GDL stage, that can be really daunting because you've never come up against the CPR before, or the undergraduate stage in law. You think, well, what? I've never heard of this concept, and you just need to, they will hopefully provide you with materials. Read through them carefully. They will know that you're at an earlier stage. They're not going to expect you to be as technically on point as a bar course student. but that doesn't matter. You can still demonstrate the skills of an advocate. In terms of those sorts of questions, I think it's really important just to, prioritize a few high quality submissions, really make sure you've understood the papers. As I mentioned before, it's the same sort of thing as when you're writing an opinion. Don't rush through those papers and think, I've only got 45 minutes and I have to actually turn up on this Zoom link and deliver my submissions. Think to yourself, I've got 45 minutes. That's time to read through everything properly, prepare, a few notes, some sort of skeletal submissions I'm going to make, and just think about the potential questions you might get asked. Think about the weaknesses of your client's position. Think about the strengths. You mentioned it before, Neera, and I thought that was a really good point. Case analysis really matters. You're going to have some facts that work in your favor, some that don't, but please don't ignore those that don't, because they will be asked of you and you will come under scrutiny. And don't worry about the judicial pushback. You'll get a member of the panel playing a judge. Make sure that you follow all the formalities. If you're in, the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, my lord, my lady, your lordships, follow the formalities, but don't be put off by judicial intervention. Answer their questions, allow them to take you where they're obviously wanting you to go, because they'll be probably trying to direct you somewhere. But stand firm in some ways. Don't completely concede. If you've made a ridiculous point, obviously you have to concede. If you know that you have no idea quite where you're going with it, it's worth conceding. But you will have to back yourself a little bit, because they will put you under pressure, and that's part of being an advocate. So don't be hesitant there.
Yeah, and sometimes too, people view being placed under pressure as a negative. Potentially, they can actually be continuously grilling you. I'm using a
Yeah,
colloquialism, because you're actually doing really well in supporting
absolutely.
your client's position. So they probably just want to see just how you would fare or manage under a bit more pressure from
Yeah.
from a judicial character. Now, this is our last question. And as I let traffic go by, do you think interview techniques for in-person interviews vary to remote interviews? Because we still live in some challenging times. So I'm keen to hear your view on that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. In one sense, no, because the same general rules apply in terms of, making sure that you're well structured, you speak at a good pace, you make eye contact. I've desperately been trying to look at the green light on my camera during this interview to demonstrate that I can do that. It's not always easy, but generally speaking, no, it is a different feel. In-person interviews, eye contact is clearly a different technique. You generally move between the panel. You wouldn't just focus on one person the whole time. It would be very strange, and I think that person might feel like, "Oh, please stop staring at me." So that's part of the challenge. Is when you're online, it's you're focusing on one thing. And there are distractions online, because right now, for instance, I can see I've got various pop-ups, I've got various documents open on my screen, and that it's a different world. You're inhabiting a different world. In person is a more natural field, but don't allow either setting to be your worst enemy. You have to make the setting. You have to use the setting and make it so that you can do as well as possible. So one thing I would recommend with notes, for instance, when you're in a physical setting, physical notes obviously really matter. And I still have them in a virtual setting, because I quite like writing something down rather than typing it up. Just because typing it up, I can often, there's something could go wrong. I could end up accidentally clicking out of the Zoom link or something, and that would be a disaster. So don't, that's just me. But writing notes down helps. Sometimes you're tempted, and you can do this online, to have your application in front of you, to have your preparation in front of you, and that's great. That's one massive advantage of online interviews. You can do that. However, the disadvantage is it encourages the distraction of both your eyes and your attention all the time, and you're thinking, you're always thinking, oh gosh, what is it I'm going to be asked next? And you're sort of scrolling through your questions, thinking, okay, am I going to get asked this? I need to get to this point. And you're not really listening often to the questions that you're actually being asked. And it will be very evident to the panel if your eyes are moving around. So it's especially important in oral advocacy assessments online to try and make as much eye contact as possible. It's a really difficult skill. I don't think I've quite mastered it, but the Jessup Moot, other, online teaching, online, as we both did, online assessments on the bar course, they helped me get used to this skill set. And then finally, I think, in both settings, you want the interview to feel as natural and non-scripted as possible. That they don't want a verbatim recital of your application or something you prepared yesterday. You want to ensure that regardless of the setting, you are as authentic as you can be. You're going to be, more naturally yourself if you don't have, loads of notes up. You're stressing about, I need to get to this point, or I haven't mentioned this yet. You're not going to be able to mention everything, by the way. That's another real frustration with these interviews. You come out and think, I really wanted to tell them about this. I've done really well. Or, I wish they'd asked about this. You're not going to have that chance, unfortunately. It's about making as much impact as you can with the few questions you do actually get asked, and not being thrown off by some slightly odd questions that you weren't expecting. Composing yourself, consciously slowing down, thinking, how can I structure this into 2 clear points or 3 clear points, and moving on. But I just, on leaving on a sort of slightly more personal note, I think, ultimately in an interview, you have to be you, the real you, and not a version of you think chambers want to see. Of course, we all act to some extent in interviews, but it's really important that you convey your real, authentic enthusiasm for the work that they do and why this is the right career for you. You will all work so hard for this opportunity and no doubt deserve it. So you have to make sure that you make yourself proud and don't fear the disappointments along the way. I'm sure that others who you've interviewed near will have stressed that disappointments, rejections, setbacks, they are a perennial feature of this unbelievably competitive process. But you take each one as it comes, you learn from them, you listen to the advice of others, you share in the success of others. I think is always a good way of making sure that you yourself stay in this positive mindset, this mindset of perseverance, of supporting others, of listening, of taking advice, of advising others. The bar is competitive enough as it is, and I don't think it's helpful to get drawn into a cycle of negative thoughts and frustrations about the process. It's always good to have clarity as to what you want, but listening to others and helping others along the way is to achieve what they want to do. So on that note, I think that's all the advice I have here. But thank you so much, Nir, for having me on this show of yours, and I'm really pleased to have been here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. And that's very much a wrap, folks. We have definitely benefited from your fountain of knowledge, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion. It's been a pleasure, Nick, and hopefully we'll definitely see you later to discuss your Young Bar mentorship scheme. So it's been great.
Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, look forward to coming back on the show, and take care of yourself.
Great, you too. Bye, everyone. We'll see you later.
Bye.